Hello, hello. Welcome to another live event tonight. This live event has been brought to you by Kilbride, and it's also been streamed to your homes from independencelive.net. And welcome, Fesgar Ma and Falsha. Welcome to a debate night again tonight. And we'll be having a live interactive event, which will be very much a case of sharing ideas and opinions, with the questions being led by you, the audience. So please get your questions in and make sure you use the hashtag tonight that they were using, which is YEKS30 for the evening. So please tweet, share and comment using that hashtag. So the question for tonight is Section 30 or not. For those of you who are not familiar with the term Section 30, it means basically we're going to debate about this term. It's a very important term that we've been discussing for quite some time around Scottish independence. It's an expected route, supposedly, to be able to hold another independence referendum. And it is a widely held belief that in order for Scotland to have another vote on independence in the next term of office, the Scottish Parliament, the SNP need the UK government to agree to transfer powers to the Scottish Parliament to allow this to happen. This could either be a permanent transfer via an Act of Westminster Parliament or a more temporary one known as the Section 30 Order. The technical name refers to the section of the Scotland Act that allows Holyrood to pass laws in areas that are normally reserved to Westminster. These orders have been used, I think, around about 16 times before, since the Devolved Scottish Parliament was created in 1999, and have allowed MSPs to legislate on topics such as construction of railways or reducing the voting age in Scottish elections. Crucially, the Section 30 order was also granted by the UK government ahead of the last independence referendum in 2014, after David Cameron and Alex Salmond signed the Edinburgh Agreement. As it stands just now, it seems that Nicola Sturgeon wants to follow the same process for an Indy Ref 2 to ensure any referendum and its results are seen as legitimate in her opinion. But could the Scottish Parliament hold an advisory referendum on the question of independence without the approval of the UK government? Or do we have to have a Section 30 order granted by the UK government to have a binding referendum? Or will we need an amendment to the Scotland Act of 1998, also granted by the UK Parliament? Some see this as a permission slip and compare it to the Brexit negotiations, where the UK government didn't need a permission slip in order to hold a referendum for the electorate to decide whether they wanted to remain in the EU. So why does Scotland, who is also part of a union, in this case the UK union, need permission from the UK government in London to be able to hold a referendum to decide its own future on whether to stay or not in the United Kingdom? Well, that's the question we have for tonight. So we have three guests who are going to share their thoughts and opinions on this very topic. And we would like to send you in your questions, please. And I will put them to the panel throughout the show. Feel free to address your questions to one panel member if you wish. And I'm sure that it'll be a highly informative and very interesting evening discussing the options that Scotland have. And in particular, where we've been seeing polls which have been sitting at around 56% for quite some time now. So it's certainly a question that needs to be asked. So without further ado, I'd like to have a warm welcome to one of our first guests for tonight, and that's Julie McNulty. Julie was a former SNP councillor for North Lanarkshire, deputy leader now of the ISP, or the Independence for Scotland Party, as well as a blog content contributor, and amongst other things, to What Wings Over Scotland. Hello and welcome, Julie.
Hi, Gwen. Nice to see you. Thanks for inviting me on tonight.
You're very welcome. It's lovely to see you. And just to say that our event tonight probably will be quite informal, but obviously the debate itself is, whatever you want to say, you feel free to see that, and the questions will be coming in due course hopefully from the people who are watching tonight. But thank you to everyone who is on watching tonight, and please do get your questions into our panel. First of all, though, I'd like to ask you all I'd like to kick things off just now with 15 minutes contribution from your thoughts and questions. Before that, I'd also like to welcome our new, one of our other panel members, Angus. Fesgyrma, Angus.
Fesgyrma, Devolved.
So we're just doing introductions just now, and Julie is just going to give a wee 10-15 minutes talk on what she thinks of Section 30 or not, and then I'll come over to you after that. Okay, Angus.
Right. Okay.
Julie, kick it off, please.
Okay, well, obviously Section 30 is something that's very much on the minds of all independence supporting people at the moment, and possible routes to independence. And I mean, the question that's been posed is Section 30 or not. I think the answer is a bit more complicated than that. What I would say about this, there's no route map to independence, okay? We know what point we're at just now. We know where we're trying to get to. It's a bit in between that's unpredictable, and it could take several courses. Really, the way you have to think about this is if you were going on a long journey, and I'm a great Lord of the Rings fan, so I always think of, Bilbo and Gandalf and stuff like that, setting out and all the preparations they made beforehand. What you don't do when you're setting on an unpredictable journey is to plan one route and stick to that all the time. There's going to be twists and turns, and you need to be ready. And one of the things that has really, really irked me about this whole debate about what has been happening for the past wee while is that Westminster have been prepared and have been preparing for this moment for quite a while. They're ready at the moment, and we're not. Now, some of us we are aware of some of the things that Westminster have done in this respect. The Internal Markets Bill is something that's very much a focus at the moment, because it's undoubtedly a power grab, and it's going to tie us into England's economy in a way that we're not tied into at the moment. It's going to have huge implications for things like our NHS, which is currently separate from the English one, and the English one is well down the route to privatisation at the moment, and various other things. There's things like the souping up of the Scottish office and stuff like that. But way, way, way before that, back in 1998, Westminster prepared the ground, and that was, first of all, the voting system that they picked, the D'Hondt system, which basically meant that we were always going to be in a tilted playground. And the other thing that they prepared was the Scotland Act and all the kind of things that were written into that. And I want to go through a couple of the things that we should be looking at. Section 30 is well known about, but how about Section 3 of the Scotland Act? That's the one that says that we need a 2/3 majority to call a snap election. That's something that we as independent supporters should be thinking about. If we need a 2/3 majority to call a snapping election, if we wanted to do that, then what are we doing about making sure that we have enough independent supporting MSPs to utilise that option? That's the kind of thing that we should be putting into our tool bag, that we should be having ready, and we should be looking at ways to use list parties and the likes to make sure, and that's where a party like myself that I belong to comes into play. How about things like the fact that we have this rump of unionist MSPs sitting in Parliament? There's a saying from Machiavelli that if you want to rule a people, what you have to do is you go and sit amongst them, and that's precisely what they're doing just now. And it's not just simply the MSPs that are there, it's the pyramid below them, it's the staffers, it's the researchers, it's the natural hub that forms round an MSP, it's the networks that they can create, the lobbying that they can do, the favours that they can grant. We need to break up that network, and we need to make a concerted effort to do it. We can't just sit back and let it happen. If we're thinking about this from a strategic point of view, we really, really need to get, to get stuck into that. So we need to start thinking strategically about things like this. The current election that's coming up, the Holyrood election, we should be calling a plebiscite. ISP are supporting the idea that the May election should be a plebiscite. And the reason that we're doing this is very simple. we actually don't know when we are going to get an opportunity, if we are going to get an opportunity to have a legitimate democratic event that will be internationally recognised by the international community at, for example, the UN, which is where all of this may well end up. So we need to take that opportunity now. We can't just sit on our hands and hope that we're going to get a Section 30 or that Martin Keating's action is going to be successful. And while we're on that subject, all the parties should be supporting that particular action that Martin Keatings is putting through. ISP gave that formal support and all of our exec chipped money in. And it's really, really important because if without that action, if we're talking about a legitimate referendum in Nicola Sturgeon terms, we can't even begin progress in the referendum bill unless we get an aye from Martin's case on that. So these are all the things that we need to be thinking about just now. In a wider sense, we need to start organising the Yes movement, and that means thinking about practical things like setting up structures, building up funds, sorting out things like leaflets and all of that. We're all sitting in aspic at the moment because of coronavirus, but really this is a time where we should be taking stock, setting up links with each other. We should be getting to grips with social media, and we should be ready to hit the streets, because this is probably going to end on the streets. If Westminster keeps moving in the direction that it's moving at the moment, it looks very much as if they might attempt to shut Holyrood. And if they do that, we need to be right out on the streets to protest. In terms of other tools that could be used, the Westminster Group, the SNP Westminster Group, should be doing as much as they possibly can to disrupt Westminster at the moment and grind their gears and start really punishing Westminster for holding on to us. And there's plenty of opportunity for that to be done with the Brexit bill, because what's following on the back of that is there's hundreds of laws to be amended. We should be challenging every single one of those and just wearing them down. So all of these things need to be prepared. All of them need to be done. Section 30 may come, Section 30 may not come, but we need to have other options. We need to be ready. Some years ago, I was actually, when I was still in the SNP, I was at National Council. It was actually in Inverclyde during the by-election, and Alex Salmond was speaking. And Alex said something that really stuck with me at that point. He was talking about progress that we were making towards independence. And one of the things he said was, remember that Westminster is an experienced player at this. This isn't their first rodeo. They have dealt with lots and lots of other countries that were formerly part of the British Empire, and they know the playbook inside out. They're going to be ready for us coming. And that means that we in turn have to be ready for them. But in my view, the worst thing that we could do is to commit ourselves to one course of action and hope for the best, because it's just not going to happen like that. Just to conclude, I would say we're going to be up for a sair fecht with this, and we'd better be prepared for it and prepared for the worst, but hope for the best, and hopefully we will get to independence.
Thanks very much, Julie. That was a really good opening contribution there. Now, our other two guests have come in. Craig come in. Hello, Craig. This is Craig Murray, who was a former British diplomat. He's now a Scottish independence and human rights activist, author and blogger. Welcome, Craig, and welcome again to Angus Brenda MacNeil, who is MP for SNP for the Western Isles. So what we were doing there was just having each of the members of the panel were able to give a wee introduction to their opinion on the question, Section 30 or what. So can I just ask you, Angus, to come in now with a short opening statement about that for, say, 10, 15 minutes, or whatever you feel you want, okay?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. I always start like that and then end up rattling on. So we'll try not to rattle on. Thanks, Julie. It was good to hear what you had to say, and good to see Craig as well. And thank you, Gwen, for the introduction. Yeah, I suppose Plan B's got its genesis in myself and Chris McAnulty of Inverclyde direction, having a blether or two about what was going to happen. And it was sort of looking about 2018 that not a lot was going to happen. I think the 2017 election had been through and the SNP had a bit of a thump and a bit of a knock, and it was being asked, the Section 30 was being asked from just no was not the time. No is not the time. And something had to happen. Around that time, I remember asking at SNP conference what the plan was, and a bit dismayed that I'd been told by some senior people that they didn't need to ask because no was going to be the answer. And I felt we should try and move it on. So on the 12th of November 2018, I wrote to Theresa May at the time to try and see what her view was, get it in paper for a Section 30, because an election was imminent probably any time, because after 2017 it was quite an unstable situation. And back came her answer on the 12th of December via David Mundell, the then Scottish Secretary, on the 12th of December, actually a year before the Scottish election, saying no. Quite simply, and then a letter which I've put on Twitter recently again. And that was kind of the answer. Now, the Scottish Government were wanting to bottom that out, and I felt frustrated by that. They were still playing the game that they might get a yes again. We spent most of 2019 looking for a referendum, but not a Scottish independence referendum, but looking for a referendum on Brexit. And that whole strategy was blown up when we caused the election ourselves in many ways. And the election was run that if we got a majority, that we would have that our majority would be a case for a Section 30. Now, I would have asked for that Section 30 before the election and got the no then, and then run the election differently, because playing us what I call the Boris veto. If we run with the Boris veto and Boris vetoes afterwards, well, what can you do? It's vetoed, and that's the end of it. So Plan A at the moment, and I'm quite prepared, myself and Chris McAnulty are prepared to let other plans run, but they've got to be established and they can't run forever. Now, I wrote again this year, I think it was on the 26th or the 12th of November, actually, both letters were sent. It happened to be a year later, or the 16th of November, one of the two. And I got my answer on the 26th of November, this time not from Boris, but via his intermediary in Scotland, his emissary on the land, Alistair Jack. And that letter basically said no again. So we've got two no letters. And the Scottish Government's got a no letter. And Theresa May said publicly no. And I think Jacob Rees-Mogg said today in the chamber, unless the SNP think a generation is the life of a fruit fly, it's no. Of course, the once in a generation stuff is nonsense. It was Alex Salmond's personal view. He did say at the time he couldn't gainsay and write subsequent SNP manifestos when he wasn't leader. And he said, "Don't be daft, Jeremy," when he was talking to Jeremy Paxman at the time on Newsnight. Now, the difference between a Plan A, and we can let Plan A run for a certain time, and indeed Martin Keating's plan, I hope it goes well, but if that's ultimately blocked and Section 30 is again subject to the Boris veto, we might not have another ballot box event for 5 years, meaning the 2026 Scottish election could be the 2021 election for slow learners. Now, time is short, and if we don't blow it the way we blew it after 2019, we've got to get our ducks in a row coming up to this election just now. And obviously, with the polls, there are 15 polls on the trot looking at independence or voting for independence or indicating for independence. This UK government are anxious that doesn't get harnessed, and that doesn't get harnessed into an answer from the people. So we leave our ask in a manifesto to ask the people to vote for us, so we can ask Boris, can we come back and ask the people a question about independence? There's a number of hurdles there where it might not happen. So at least the people can say, yes, you can go and ask Boris. And then we ask Boris, he says, no, that's where it falls. Now, at the moment, when it falls at Boris, it's consequence-free. As we saw in January this year, Boris said, no, there's no consequence because we didn't have another mandate. Now, people say, don't show your hand. But you've got to show your hand. You can't have secret mandates. You've got to tell the people what you're doing. You can't say, well, actually, a vote for us was a vote for Christmas every week, or it was a vote for actually for independence of that last election, but we didn't tell you. You've got to be upfront and tell the people and have a mandate or whatever other permutation of stuff. So you can't have secret mandates or secret strategies for the direct point of independence. So what I want to do, and what Plan B and what Chris McElhenney and what many other supporters of Plan B understand Plan B to do, is not to ask the question, to ask the question, to ask the question. It goes direct for an answer. And it gets an answer from the Scottish people. What is the most internationally recognised and most legally occurring event in any country, which is its elections. Now, the Scottish people say at an election that they want independence. A lot of the Plan A only guys say to me, well, Boris could say no to that. Indeed, he could. But he'd only say no to that. 2 points to consider there. He's already said no to Plan A, because we're letting Plan A run. So he says no to Plan A. But if he says no to Plan B, it is a different thing from saying no to Plan A. Saying no to Plan B is different to saying no to Plan A. Saying no to Plan A is saying no to a bunch of politicians who say they've got a mandate from an election to do something. Saying no to Plan B is saying no to the people who've spoken directly at the election. So if you say no to Plan B, Mr. Johnson, or whoever is the UK Prime Minister after the Brexit disasters of January and February, you are actually behaving like Lukashenko of Ukraine. Now, I don't think there's any UK PM, and certainly the people around about him don't want to go around the world as UK MPs do, and to be put in that sort of bracket where they are turning a deaf ear to a constituent part of their state. At the moment, Scotland is a nation in a union, and if they're not accepting that, that puts them in a very difficult place if the Scottish people were to vote for independence at the only legal route of using a ballot box in the next in the next year or two. That is for a certain. So I suppose on my final points, I'll just leave people with this thought. What we're seeing at the moment is Boris Johnson blocking your routes to using the ballot box at a referendum. And unfortunately, SNP policy at the moment is unfortunately blocking your routes to use the ballot box at a general election. So it's almost a perfect storm. There's one lot blocking independence at a referendum and another in an election. And is that because they haven't conceived of the idea, they haven't thought the idea through, or they just want to stick with the policy they have and others follow without question? Now, I think the thing that we should have done was have a debate about this, because we could have had a debate about this at SNP conference. It was blocked twice. Chris McElhenney, God bless him, even went to Aberdeen in 2019. I didn't go. It was a long way to Aberdeen from Barra, I thought. And they blocked it on the agenda. They then pulled a sort of a mother and apple pie motion by John Swinney, which was saying the Scottish Government was great. And Chris had the idea of throwing in a thing as an amendment there. They pulled that. And then Chris went along trying to get it on, and he got booed on stage for trying to raise independence. This year, one of the excuses was, the National Secretary hadn't agreed the wording. So this year, we got the National Secretary involved, got him up to his neck with us, writing the motion this year. But then they decided not to use it at all. So we've got to do something about getting that as SNP policy. Time is short. If we don't, the game's probably a bogey after the 2021 election, because if we think this through a little bit, finally, I was going to stop, but here I go. There's maybe two other points. If we think this through, if we run to the election and the SNP is the largest party saying that we want a Section 30, and there's nobody saying that if the majority of MSPs vote for independence, having been elected on that ticket, that itself will be a direct mandate, then where does that leave us? It leaves us absolutely nowhere. There's no parliamentary route, and then there is no a referendum route, which makes the 2026 election, as I said, the Scottish independence election, or the 2021 election for slow learners. And we're delaying for 5 more years of economic extremism from the Tories at Westminster. I think of that, I'll maybe just stop and let's see what the questions bring up. But I hope that's enough for people at the moment. And I hope they understand the difference essentially between Plan A and Plan B. Plan A asks permission from Boris and makes Boris the most important player in the independence game going forward. Plan B goes direct to the people and they decide what should happen to Scotland in future. Thanks, Gwen.
Thank you. That's excellent. So we'll move on to Craig now. So Craig, would you like to give your point of view to the question, Section 30 or not? Oh, we can't hear you, I don't think. Does Craig need to be unmuted?
How's that? Is that better?
Yes, that's you now. That's great.
That's me now. I'll start with a couple of SNP conference stories to start off, to finish off from the one that Angus just told. I've got an SNP conference agenda here from a past conference. The logo of that one was Stronger for Scotland. The latest one was Hope, I think. I think the one before that was Change. It'd be lovely to see independence as a logo. Now, a couple of years ago, I was going off to conference as a delegate, and there was no mention of independence anywhere in the entire conference agenda, going through all the motions. We were adopting some constitutional amendments, and independence occurs in the Constitution. But that was the only mention of independence in the entire agenda, including the agenda also details on the Finge meetings, and not one of those mentioned independence either. Being a delegate, I thought, I'll book a Finge meeting. Now, booking Finge meetings at SNP conference is extraordinarily prohibitively expensive. It costs thousands of pounds to hire a room in the conference hall, but I got the thousands of pounds together, and I applied to hire a room to hold a Finge meeting on independence. And for a couple of weeks, I got no reply at all. I kept phoning them up. And eventually, I got a reply from a Peter Morrill saying that I couldn't book a room because I was only an individual member, and individual members are not allowed to book rooms. It has to be an organization or a company. Now, I have a company which runs music festivals. So I went back and said, that's great. My company would like to book a Finge meeting to discuss independence. And I got a reply back from Peter Morrill, which said that my company was not allowed to book a Finge meeting to discuss independence. Companies were only allowed to book Finge meetings to promote their own products. So Heathrow Airport can and does book out 3/4 of the bloody hall to tell us why we all need much more pollution from air traffic. And that's fine, that's good. But a company could not possibly book a room at SNP conference to discuss Scottish independence. So anyway, so I wasn't allowed to book a room, my company wasn't allowed to book a room, and all efforts to get an actual discussion at Scottish independence at that conference by paying to have a Finge meeting were blocked. It wasn't allowed. And I think, where we went terribly wrong in the 2017 election, and why in Westminster election, why the SNP lost so many seats. As you remember, that was the Don't Mention Independence referendum, where election, where the Tory shtick was all the time to say, you want independence, you should get on with the day job. And Nicola's reply to that was not, yes, we need independence, that's why I'm talking about it. Nicola's reply to it throughout was, I'm not talking about independence, I am getting on with the day job. You're the one talking about independence. It's the Tories who keep bringing up independence. And by not foregrounding independence in the 2017 campaign, in fact, by seeing almost ashamed of the notion of independence, the SNP lost a whole raft of Westminster seats in 2017. We are shortly hitting, and it could be hitting very hard indeed, hitting actual Brexit. We mustn't forget that England and Wales voted for Brexit. They're getting what they voted for. The SNP lost 2 years when it should have been campaigning for independence, campaigning against Brexit for the whole of the UK. And the party leader, who could never go on an AUOB march, found time to go down and march and stand on a platform with Alistair Campbell to campaign against Brexit. Scotland has no right to keep England and Wales inside the EU against the will of their electorate expressed in the referendum. Just as England and Wales have no right to take Scotland out of the EU. The solution to Brexit is for Scotland to become independent and stay in the EU as its people voted for, and for England and Wales to leave as their people voted for. The SNP had no business ever to be campaigning for the whole of the UK to stay in the EU against the democratic wishes of the people of England and Wales. If we believe England and Wales are separate countries, as we do, then we should let them go their own way. If they want to vote Tory, if they want to leave the EU, if they want Brexit, that's their business. It's not our business. Let's start behaving now as though we believe in independence. Let's stop worrying so much about interfering in the business of Westminster in the governance of England and Wales. Because you either believe in self-determination or you don't. And by the same token, we shouldn't be asking for permission. We shouldn't be asking for Section 30. Scotland is an ancient nation. We have our own culture, but we have a long historical association as a nation, a long historical record as a nation. We ended our independent nationhood by a voluntary treaty, not by conquest or subjugation. There is no doubt whatsoever that the Scots meet the category of a people in terms of the UN Charter, a people with the right of self-determination. And the right of self-determination is inalienable. You can't lose it because you are subjugated by someone else, or you are part of a wider empire or polity. That was the whole point of the United Nations declaring the right of a people to self-determination in the Charter. That's what drove the decolonization process. And we are a people. We are a people in terms of the UN Charter under Article 1, Para 2 of the UN Charter. We have the right of self-determination. You cannot believe that the Scots are a people with the right of self-determination and also believe that we can only move forward to independence with the permission of Westminster. Those two beliefs are incompatible. If you think we need Westminster's permission for independence to be legal, then you don't really believe Scotland is a nation with the right of self-determination. We shouldn't be asking. We should not be asking. We should be taking our independence. There's no point in asking because we'll never be given it. The Tories only agreed to the 2014 referendum because at the time they agreed, independence was at 28-30% in the opinion polls, and they thought there wasn't a hope in hell they would lose. The Tories agreed to 2014 entirely because they were confident they would win. They got the shock of their lives. They didn't expect that tremendous upwelling of hope and enthusiasm and joy that constituted from the streets, that constituted the 2014 referendum campaign. They're not going to make that mistake again. They're not going to agree a Section 30. Asking for it as a political token, I suppose, does no particular harm, but it's already casting doubt on your right of self-determination if you believe that you need permission. I perfectly agree that if we can't be granted a referendum, the idea of making the next Holyrood election a plebiscitary election as a plan B is something with which I agree. We've been blocked from putting that forward as SNP strategy to date, and I doubt that's the way we will go. I'd like to make the point you don't need a referendum. The large majority of countries in the world, the majority of countries in the world actually have come independent during my lifetime as independent nations. And the large majority of them didn't have a referendum. And even in those which have had a referendum, that's not necessarily the start of the process. If you look at the Baltic states, for example, which are all now fully accepted members of the European Union, they had declarations of independence from their local parliaments, from their Soviets, before they had confirmatory referenda later. That, I think, is the way we should go. If we continue to be blocked from holding a referendum, I have no objection to holding a referendum, but if we're blocked from having one, the Scottish Parliament should declare independence, and then, as an independent nation, we should have our own confirmatory referendum held under our own auspices, without permission, without interference from London, under the guidance of the Scottish Electoral Commission. And I want just to come to the legality of this as well, because it infuriates me, it really does, where the notion that it is illegal to obtain independence without an S30 is a complete and utter nonsense. The notion that the law of the United Kingdom, the domestic law of the United Kingdom, has any bearing on the legality of Scottish independence is a nonsense. Independence is not a question of UK domestic law. Independence is purely a matter of international law, purely a matter of relationships between states. And we become independent at the point that the United Nations recognize us as an independent state. To the extent it doesn't matter, the domestic legislation could say we were independent. The Westminster and Edinburgh could agree that we are an independent country. If the United Nations didn't recognize us, that would have no effect. Look at the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus, to give one of several examples. It's not what the domestic legislation says, which makes you independent. It's recognition by the United Nations. And if you are recognized by the United Nations, the state you are leaving cannot prevent you leaving. And I want to quote, I know most people have probably heard me, or many people have probably heard me quote this before, but I want to quote it because it's extremely important. This is the United Kingdom making its case to the International Court of Justice in the case of Kosovo. The International Court of Justice was giving an advisory opinion to the UN General Assembly on the legality of Kosovo declaring independence. And the United Kingdom supported Kosovo declaring independence. And in doing so, the United Kingdom specifically argued that the domestic legislation of Serbia or Yugoslavia could not have any effect on the legality of Kosovan independence, which was purely a matter of international law. And I'm going to read this out to you very briefly. International law has not treated the legality of the act of secession under the internal law of the predecessor state as determining the effect of that act on the international plane. In most cases of secession, of course, the predecessor state's law will not have been complied with. That is true almost as a matter of definition. So the UK government argued that basically becoming independent is almost always going to be illegal in terms of the law of the state you are leaving, but it doesn't matter in international law. And the key thing to add here is that the International Court of Justice agreed with the United Kingdom's position on this. And let me just read one more sentence from that, just to show you that, I'm not making up what I'm saying, if you like. Again, this is the UK government to the International Court of Justice in the Kosovo case. Whether a declaration of independence leads to the creation of a new state by separation or secession depends not on the fact of the declaration, but on subsequent developments, notably recognition by other states. As a general matter, an act not prohibited by international law needs no authorization. So, again, it's getting yourself recognized which counts. And we have the extremely strong position that the UK is no longer an EU member state. The problem with the EU is a club of member states. Whatever you may think of its aspirations and aims and declared intentions, it always functions as a club of member states defending each other's interests. That's why the EU was so unhelpful over Catalonia, because the member state is Spain and it was defending Spanish interests. The UK is no longer a member state. The EU has no interest in helping defend the interests of the UK. In fact, it is Scotland which is the potential member state, which the EU wants to join, and which the EU has every interest in defending. Plus, the EU has, where they may not express it publicly, but they have a very definite interest in showing that it was a disaster for the UK, it was a disaster for Boris Johnson, it was a disaster for Westminster to leave the EU. Because otherwise, of course, other states may leave the EU. They want to show that's a very bad decision. So the breakup of the UK would be a salutary lesson as far as the EU was concerned. The EU has every incentive to recognise an independent Scotland, and it would do so on the basis of international law as outlined in the Kosovo case and as put forward by the UK itself in its submission on the Kosovo case. And once the EU states recognise an independent Scotland, the rest of the United Nations will follow very quickly. And I should add that African and other developing world states will have a strong incentive to do so in terms of the decolonization, anti-imperialist narrative, which is a good one for us to put forward. Now, I'm sorry, I've probably spoken far too long, but that's my view of the way forward. No Section 30. Parliament declares independence. Our own confirmatory referendum. Go for international law, and we don't care what Westminster thinks.
That's a very interesting point of view, and I think that's interesting. So basically, the thoughts that you have there is that we don't actually need a Section 30 because we don't really need a referendum. So that's a really interesting point of view to bring in as well. And I'm really keen that we do get a across opinion of what you guys think is the best way forward. But we've had a few questions coming in now, so that's really good from the people who are watching. And the first question I'll put to you, Julie, because you've been sitting quiet for so long. We haven't forgotten about you. It's okay. But what I'll do is I'll ask you all, if you want to chip in, just put your hand up if you want to answer the question. Okay, but I'll go for you first, Julie, because anyway, Anyway, the question is from Ashley Kenny. The question is, why do we have to ask permission to leave the voluntary union, and why do they have the right to tell us no? So it fits in quite well to what Craig was saying there. But so why do we have to ask permission to leave the voluntary union, and why do they have the right to tell us no? What do you think about that, Julie?
I suppose, I mean, the thing that we're all kind of grappling with at the moment is that and Craig has made a very good point about it, is at some point there is going to be a leap of faith in this. We're very used to living under under the UK sort of thing, and it's a question of when people are going to be ready to make that leap. So it's natural to reach out first of all for the kind of mechanisms that are there, that the laws that we understand, the authorities that we normally go to. And that's a process that I would say we've been going through for the last couple of years, sort of thing. I mean, there is no, we don't, as Craig has laid out, legally, we in terms of the UN and all the rest of it, we don't. But it's trying to get the Scottish people to make that leap. And we have to be mindful at the moment that we are on 50, we're in the low 50s, which is, still nearly half the country are not ready to make that leap. I think in the next couple of months that things are going to change rapidly. They're going to go rapidly downhill. I'm someone that works in a helpline. I deal with a lot of employment cases. I can see the tsunami coming in basically, people losing jobs, people out of work. We are going to be looking at food shortages, probably. And I use this word carefully, starvation. In fact, it's already happening. Food banks are going up, and a lot of there's a lot of quiet people out there who are suffering very, very badly just now. And I think the impetus from that will enable Scotland to make that leap. So I think, the short answer is no, we don't have to. But there has to be a mindset, and the Scottish people need to get the confidence to understand that they are a nation. Again, coming back to what Craig was saying, I think we've lost a sort of sense of where we came from, and the fact that we do have, we had our own kingdom, we had our own parliament. As what Walter Scott put it, nobody's nails can reach the length of London now, and we need to bring it back here. So that's what I would say. Okay,
thank you. So would you want to answer that, Brendan?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a question that sounds quite simple. Why do we have to ask permission? But actually, I think behind that and answering that, hopefully, the confusion that some people have got themselves into, perhaps around the leadership or the decision making, the who controls conference at SNP. We don't really have to ask permission of the UK at all, and I think Craig well laid it out. But what we need to do is establish democratic legitimacy in Scotland. We have to know that the Scottish people want independence. And the way we've chosen, and the way that Alex Salmond's mechanism was to do that, was to uncouple elections. The way Margaret Thatcher said, just SNP win a majority of seats and you're independent. At that stage, we needed to uncouple, or it was felt we needed to uncouple the actual process of electoral advancement of the SNP to prove that we were competent. So you didn't have people saying we just can't do it. So we had to show some competency. And the way to get into government and show competency was to unhook the two things. Now, we then in 2014, you said that the referendum, as we know, lost. So we're not asking permission. Where we've got ourselves into a problem is that we want to do a referendum again, and the particular referendum route we've used, or it's only one maybe open to us for certain at the moment, requires agreement from the Westminster government. Now, if our side are saying we definitely won't use an election, which is the one legal and the one definitely internationally recognised thing's going to happen in Scotland in the next while, and we ourselves are closing one door, and we're leaving only one other door open. And we're not asking permission for independence, but what we are asking permission for is a particular mechanism for independence, and that is a mechanism of the referendum for independence. Now, I think that's a mistake to close the other door. Yeah, play the game, and if they want, ask that. But then when that door is slammed in our faces, as it will be, and as it's been a number of times, we go back through the other door and we use the ballot boxes at an election, the one certain event that's going to happen. So I'm glad of the question, because the question then lets us untangle what has been looked for here. It's not permission for independence that's been required, it's permission for a referendum. And that's why I've coined the phrase the Boris veto. The Boris veto comes in because if you asking him for a referendum, he can go no. And he is going to go no, because he sees the polls like everybody else. And he's not going to hand us the golden ticket to end his whatever he wants, or his precious union, or whatever he calls it. Of course, the union isn't even 100 years old, because we know Ireland had left Great Britain, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland in 1922. So it's the UK of Great Britain and Northern Ireland now. It was Great Britain and Ireland, I hope I said that correctly. But it's Great Britain and Northern Ireland now, and that's a state that's younger than probably some of the older Hollywood actors and actresses that might still be alive. So remember, we're not asking permission for independence, but our party position in the SNP is we've chosen to ask permission for a particular mechanism to get us to independence. And it's the confusion of what we're really trying to do is establish the legitimacy of the people's voice. And I think we've got other mechanisms to do that. And that's why we've got Plan B. And that's why we're talking about, if other routes are blocked, that we use the election of May 2021.
Okay, thank you. Craig, would you like to come in that question?
You're muted, Craig. You're muted.
I think Craig.
That was probably a tremendous answer.
Absolutely brilliant and unrepeatable. No, I think I think that's basically what I covered in my wee talk. So I don't think I need to add anything.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, thanks for those. And to move on to the next question for tonight, which is from Jim. Yes, I've not missed one out. Jim, and it's I don't know what his second name is, but he's got I think it's a Twitter handle, which is No Love for the UK. So anyway, will a successful result in the Martin Keating's Section 30 action force the hand of the gradualists in the SNP leadership? So who would like to answer that question?
Shall I come in, seeing as I didn't answer the last one?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating. I'm not convinced there will be a successful result because you are looking for the Court of Session to define what is the state of law on the question in Scotland, and it doesn't seem to me it doesn't seem to me automatic that you'll get one answer or the other there. If Martin Keating's wins the case, that really is going to remove the excuse for delay, for this appalling procrastination we've been having over independence from the Scottish government for the last 2 or 3 years. Their excuse they've been hiding behind is going to vanish. But I also think it's going to be things to head in another way, because it seems to me what is extremely likely is that if Martin Keating's wins a case, and I should say, I think we should all take our hat. I think Martin Keating is amazing. I think he's done an absolutely fantastic job, and those people who put their hands in their pocket to support him are amazing. I think what we will see is, I think we'll see the Tories at Westminster pass a new law at Westminster to nullify the result of that court case, to say you can't have a referendum, to make that explicit, which the Supreme Court will uphold on the doctrine of the sovereignty of the Westminster Parliament. So, but that also would force the hand of the Scottish government, because how do they then react to that? How do you react to Westminster bringing in a new law specifically to deny the democratic rights of the Scottish people? At that stage, you either bend the knee and kowtow to Westminster, or you fight, and you have to fight at that stage. I don't mean physically, obviously, but you have to embark on a real immediate journey to independence, whether Westminster wants it or not. So I think one way or another, if Martin wins, it will force the hand of the Scottish government, very, very much so. And I'm enormously looking forward to the case in January.
Thanks very much. Would either of you like to come in on that question?
Yeah, I would agree with Craig. I think one of the problems with Martin Keating's case is going to be timing, because it is January. It's Court of Session. Court of Session could sit in its hands for 6 months to come to a decision. That's the kind of thing they can do, and then if it gets appealed, it goes to the Supreme Court. So, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Boris might jump the gun by that point and just shut everything down. I mean, that's basically what I'm afraid of, because all the moves that I've seen Westminster make all seem to be pointing towards that. But I think it'd be very, very difficult for the SNP not to react to that as the main engine of independence. I think they would have to start moving or be called out.
Thank you. Do you want to come in, Angus?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the good things about doing the Martin Keating's approach is we actually find out one way or the other. It moves the thing on. Doing nothing isn't a good idea in this whole process, and that's been the situation probably for a bit too long. I mean, the Scottish government sat on its hands a little. If I can be critical of my colleagues, I think from 2018 onwards, there was a reluctance asking for Section 30 after an election. And, that reluctance early on to move it or to push the Section 30 route, well, you're saying no to it. The idea, and myself and I'm going to paste the motion of Plan B, myself and Chris McElhinney's motion takes that into account. The Scottish Parliament has one, but if all doors are closed, you can't ultimately turn around to people and say no. So other mechanisms have to be found, and there'll be the ballot boxes eventually at an election, which would be unfortunate if the 2026 election becomes what should have been the 2021 election, and we lose 5 years to the Tory economic extremists. So yeah, I welcome something that's moving it on, and that's moving it on.
If I can jump back in, I mean, one of the interesting things I'm observing just now is Jacob Rees-Mogg seems to be sabre rattling with regard to the Supreme Court. Probably as a direct result of what happened with the prorogation thing last year. And the Supreme Court is an offshoot from the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, which is basically sort of the House of Lords. And if they brought the Supreme Court back under the direct influence of the Privy Council, the person who's actually the president of that at the moment is Jacob Rees-Mogg. So I'm wondering if the sort of moves that are going on are in preparation for maybe Martin Keating's case succeeding. So up here, and making quite sure that it won't succeed down there.
I think if I can come on the back of Julie's point there, in many ways we've got lost in ourselves. We like processes a bit in Scotland, but what we're really talking about here is establishing what the people want. Now, I think all of us here tonight agree that we've got to find a way of establishing what the people want. And to me, there's mechanisms that are going to be tried at everything else, except the one thing you can't really do is tell people at an election you can't or cannot vote for such and such an idea. It's a democracy. You're open for everything in a democracy. So we've got to find a way of getting an answer for the people for what they want. Now, the answer might well be no. Fair enough. That's what Scottish people, if they want the economic extremism of the Tories for another few years and all that goes with that, that would be their choice. But the other point is them, by going by the polls, it looks like they want independence, and nobody should be stopping that choice either. So both sides, we should see democracy, and we should see both sides at least accepting what comes out from that democratic choice.
Thank you. So potentially then an exploratory referendum to find out the people's wishes at some point. Potentially, I'm just thinking. But basically, so for more questions coming in.
If you can hold that, and why don't we do that now? It's the fierce urgency of now in a lot of these things. Because I'd like to find out and know about those things before the 2021 election. If we find out after the 2021 election, say if we find out sometime between May and December next year, well, we're hanging about another few Mays until May 2026.
That's right. We don't want to wait. Well, personally, I don't want to be waiting that long. Okay, so thanks very much. So we've got some more, quite a few questions coming in. So it's looking very good. So question here from James Cassidy. And it's, how do the ISP, so I presume this is probably directed at you, Julie, propose to gain a foothold in mainstream news reporting so that the average voter becomes aware of their existence and the ISP's tact?
Well, what we're doing just now is one way of doing it, Gwen. We have been recently, I don't know if people have noticed, we have been ramping up our social media. No one shows you how to set up a political party, and it's not that easy. I've been grinning ruefully at that term that's been going around, pop-up party. I can assure you that the last thing that parties do is pop up. And we have had to dot an awful lot of I's and cross an awful lot of T's. So we've just finished setting up branches, bank accounts, we're in the middle of vetting, and now we've sort of turned to social media, and we're just going to hit it for all we're worth. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're putting up videos, we're doing, I'm doing a lot of writing. We've got someone who's very good in economics who's now contributing, and we've just got to keep peddling it. There are restrictions on us with regard to coronavirus. I mean, if it was down to me, I would go about this the old-fashioned way and do the old shoe leather and get round doors, because it is your biggest bang for your buck sort of thing. But that's basically how we intend to do that. The mainstream media are not the most helpful sometimes, because they do have their own agendas. But if we get the word out amongst the grassroots, and I know that Twitter is not, is not a definitive guide to a lot, but we've been polling pretty well on these things, and on samples of 4,000 and 5,000 of that, we've been hitting about 25-30% on a lot of those. So we're quite pleased with where we are at the moment. But I mean, we do recognise that we're running to stand still. The thing is, I mean, we're not. I'm speaking for myself here, but I think I'm speaking for other people. We intend to stick around. We're not going to disappear after the Holyrood election. So we're just starting to dig in now.
Okay, well, thanks very much. So we'll go on to the next question, which is from Stephen Kelly. And the question is, why don't we reconvene our Parliament again? We have to protect the people of Scotland first and foremost. We don't need permission to leave a voluntary union. I'm presuming that means reconvene our Parliament in full rather than being partially, just being a devolved Parliament. Does anyone want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a number of those things, and we may have points of fine disagreement with this, I'm not sure, I've no idea, I'm not sure, but we've got to establish the legitimacy on the view of the people in this. Is that what the people want to happen? And how are we going to establish that? Well, we need either a referendum, we need to use an election, we need to use a ballot box somewhere. I mean, there's loads of things I'd love to do, but I'm not really sure I could take the people with me. I would have to check that. And we check that as in a democracy is at the ballot box. And we're back to this same old conundrum. If we don't get our referendums blocked by Boris, and if we don't get our elections blocked by SNP policy, where do we go?
And does anybody else want to come in that question?
Not really, no.
No, Craig, you don't want to come in, Craig?
No, I mean, I think that is if Plan B were adopted, that's the logical consequence. I mean, I think what Angus and I, there are great similarities in the kind of plan that Angus and I want to go forward. In that, if we were to have the May elections as a plebiscitary election, then presumably the Scottish Parliament, which is then elected, is elected with a mandate to declare independence as the Parliament of Scotland, and becomes a Parliament of an independent Scotland. That would seem to me the obvious way forward. I think sadly that's not something. I mean, for me, that's what needs to happen now. The SNP needs to say in its manifesto for May, if you vote for us and if we are elected, we will declare independence. And I presume that the ISP would go along with something along those lines, that it is being elected in order that if the ISP were part of a pro-independence majority in Parliament, then and if a referendum were blocked, then it would be prepared to support a declaration of independence ultimately.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, we would.
Great. Okay, thank you. So the next question is from David R. I think it's David Russell. And it's why did ScotGov attempt to sabotage the People's Section 30 court case?
Well, I think Craig's maybe got more of a legal mind than me. I know it's my party of government, and this is the Martin Keating's case. And Craig will probably correct me as I boldly put literally my foot in it, but I think their fear was they would rather do this in the Parliament and then have the UK government challenge them than establish it in the courts and maybe lose it there. So there's a sort of a sequencing of the thing. It's the best answer I can give. Craig, do you want to completely pull the rug from under my feet or what?
No, I mean, we don't. The argument they actually used was that it's not up to ordinary people, that Martin Keatings and his people are just ordinary citizens, and they are usurping the prerogative of the Scottish Parliament and government by bringing this case, because it's up to the Scottish government to ask for Section 30, not up to Martin Keating. So he shouldn't be asking for a decision on something it's not in his power to ask for. In effect, it was I would characterise it as "Who do you think you are?"
which is a strange argument, because given at Westminster, as the Tory and English MPs assert that Parliament is sovereign, we're never finished barking back at them. In Scotland, the people are sovereign. So when a person has gone to the court to try and do something, we're now suddenly saying the people are not sovereign. Oops.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. No, I think we all think it was very wrong of the Scottish government to actually intervene against Martin Keating. But if you were looking for justification, a political justification, it would be that it's premature. This is an unhelpful answer. It's tactically the wrong moment. You can think up reasons, but the legal reason they gave was that it's not up to Martin Keating to ask.
Do you want to comment on that, Julie?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, apart from the rightness or wrongness of it, and I thought they shouldn't have done it, but politically speaking, I thought it was a really naive thing to do. I mean, they didn't have to. They didn't have to oppose it. The Lord Advocate was there. There were other people who were respondents in the case. I really do not understand, and I mean, this is part of my worry just now. Is we're not really sure what's going on in the SNP just now. There seems to be different things going on, and that was an absolutely, to me, politically speaking, nonsensical thing to do. There was just no benefit I could see to it at all. Why they would even get involved in that. And it is worrying that, it was part of the reason that we formed the ISP, because we said we don't know what's going on, but we've got to get things moving, and if things go south with the SNP, then we need to have a backup,
Yes. Okay, thanks. So I'll move on to the next question, which is from Jeff Bush. And the question is, it's for Angus, who's, I hope that's not, is that the view out of your window tonight, Angus, that we can see now? I'm very jealous. Anyway.
I wish it was.
Anyway, so basically it's just directed for you, and it said, would you approve of an amendment to Plan B, whereby the final Section 30 request is made, say, in February 2021 to Focus Minds?
Yeah, I think actually in our last draft we had it something like the 31st of March or something like that. But yeah, I think there's some date. We can't let the Section 30 run forever. And yet another thing myself and Chris McElhenney have said is that we probably haven't got the best or the final best yet. We think it's a better, but that even it sounds a little arrogant. So I'm sure that these things can be improved. And I think one of the things is to put a deadline on to when we allow the UK government to agree to a Section 30, and then we move on to the election, use the ballot boxes at an election. And I think that becomes important as well for the dynamics of the election, because by refusing the Section 30, Boris Johnson then is part of the voice that says there is no referendum and this election is for independence. So it would always, by default, you could snare Boris Johnson into it. At the moment, of course, everything's consequence-free from Boris Johnson. We ask him afterwards, he says no, and he moves on. And we have to remember, from where Boris Johnson is standing, Scotland's 8.1% of the UK population, and if 55-60% of Scotland want independence, that's only about 4.5%. In other words, 95-96% aren't wanting or bothered about independence. Many are not bothered, and I know a number of Tory and Labour MPs are not that bothered about independence either way. But that's the situation Boris will be in. I'll go and deal with that phone.
Okay. Right, thank you. That's great. So I'll let you take your call, and we'll move on to the next question, which is from Hashbury Stumble. And the question is, what would be the consequences of taking our independence via VIS, the negotiations, which would still have I don't quite sure understand the question. Just to the people behind the scenes, Paul, could you maybe send that question again, please? Thanks. Anyway, go on to the next one. It's from Rising Caledonia. So basically, why wait for a Section 30? They're getting their way. We want ours. We voted to remain. So let's just leave the UK and just remain in the EU. End of. So it's basically a statement. So suggesting that we don't really need to do it. We don't need to wait for anything. So what's your response to that? Does anybody want to come in on that?
Well, I think basically Craig's response to that the previous time is we do need to have a democratic event. We can't, and we do have to bring the Scottish people with us. They're the most important people in this. They are sovereign, and we have to make sure that everyone is willing to do that. It's not that straightforward.
So I agree with that, but with a twist, which is that I'm very open to the idea, and I think the way to move this all forward might well be eventually, because I agree with what Julie was saying earlier. I think things are going to go. I think events are going to overtake us all. I think things are going to go pear-shaped fairly quickly for the UK. I'm very open to the idea that Parliament declares independence first, and then you have a confirmatory referendum after, rather than necessarily having to have the referendum beforehand. That's one way, and that's the way I think we will eventually end up going. And as I say, and it's a route taken by several current EU members within the last couple of decades. So there's nothing outlandish about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I suppose things might be such that it might be seen that a referendum might not be necessary afterwards. And I think, speaking to them as I'm chair of the House of Commons International Trade Committee, and speaking to the mirror companies, and particularly the Road Haulage Association very recently, things are not looking good at all, guys. Things are looking really bad. And I think parts of the media are waking up to it, but generally, on the whole, they're not. So Craig's right, things could be moving quite rapidly, and I don't think we've got the fleet of foot or planned anything for this in the last 2 years, coming up to this December 2020 date, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. So we'll move on to the next question, which is from Alec Adam. And the question is, do you think we will still have a devolved parliament in 2026? This is directed at you, Angus, but obviously the other panellists can come in after.
Yeah, I think we will. I mean, I basically think that what's going to happen, I've heard a lot that they might abolish the parliament. No, they'll just pull the teeth out of the parliament. Abolishing the parliament would be just too big a statement and a totemic thing to do. And why abolish it when you can pull the teeth out of it, and it looks and it feels that it's still there. So I just think that it'll still be there, but it won't be great.
Okay, thanks. Julia, Craig, do you want to come in on that question?
I mean, I think we have to be careful with what Westminster are doing just now. When Boris Johnson came up to Scotland and, he was waving crabs about and things like that up in Orkney, I mean, all that sort of buffooning about that he does all the time was covering his serious intent, which was he was checking out the oil installations, and then later on he was checking the military installations. When Rishi Sunak came up, he went to the Isle of Bute. What's just across the water there, Hunterston. I think he was possibly also visiting some influential Tory donors who are up there as well. The point is they have prepared for everything. Don't rule it out that they might shut us down, Angus. I think they might well attempt that.
I mean, another school of thought is their bandwidth, and whether they're having to deal with Brexit, COVID, with the G7 coming up in the next few months. They've a lot on their plates. Fighting us won't be as easy either. They don't have the EU as a members club backing them up as they did the last time. The Jose Manuel Barrosos are not there looking for jobs. So, yeah, I suppose. I mean, that's one of the things about crystal ball gazing. We can both look at each side of the ball and see something different. But I mean, we've got to both keep alert to various points of view. And I think I heard what Julie said on and I take bear it in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll be independent well before 2026. If there's still a devolved parliament in 2026, then I would urge everyone never ever to vote SNP again, but because we've had 15 opinion polls in a row with a majority for independence. You've got the only demographic with a majority for the union is the over 60s. In fact, I think it's the over 65s. If you can't achieve independence from here, then you're not trying. Whether the SNP leadership is trying is, of course, something which bluntly, I have my doubts about, as do many of us. But the devolution has run its course. I don't actually care if the Tories abolish Holyrood. Because we're going for independence anyway. In fact, that might kickstart us towards independence, might be a good thing. I'm actually not bothered about the limited powers of the Scottish Parliament, because devolution after a while becomes a trap. All the Scottish Parliament can do is try to make things run competently, managerially, using the limited amount of our own money that the Tories give back to us. And that's been cut back and back and back by Tory austerity. So services are bound, and it's going to continue getting cut back by Tory austerity. So things are bound to get worse. You're going to be defending all the time your health service and your education service against a background of a Tory-run economy. And it becomes a trap. It becomes a trap. We've had enough of it. Devolution is finished, as far as I'm concerned. I absolutely couldn't care less about the devolved powers of the Holyrood Parliament. It's now time to forget it and go for independence.
Thank you. Just as a point to note there that I did read today that Wales have done opinion polls and they're sitting well above 50% support for independence now as well. So it seems to me that they're having similar opinions about the devolved Parliament. Particularly.
If I can say that, Gwen, I mean, that's interesting. I hadn't seen that poll. But what I have noticed in Wales is just a straightforwardness about campaigning for it and being upfront about it. And Adam Price, whenever he's at a microphone, is saying it, the leader of Plaid Cymru at the moment. So it goes to show that when you have a campaign and lead and push it, the percentages come the way.
That's true. We actually, there was a person who was in Cymru who had said that since January and basically during lockdown this year, their enormous amount of people, like 10,000 odd people, whatever, I can't remember exactly, had joined Cymru. So they feel that because of the way things have been going on during the pandemic. Anyway, that's the Welsh situation, but there's always a comparable thing because they're both putting pressure on, on what's happening in Westminster in their own way.
It's as I was saying earlier. I mean, this is all about taking opportunities and preparing and working things out. At the moment, I mean, we're all stuck in the house because of COVID. So, I mean, the one thing that all of us who support independence should be doing is hitting social media. And to expand on the point that Jim Cassidy was making earlier about mainstream media, that's not just a problem for small parties, that's a problem for everyone that supports independence. We just don't have the support of mainstream media. That's a fact, and that's something we all live with. But we've got to find a route around it. There's no point sitting moaning about it and moaning about the Johnston Press or stuff like that. We've got to create these things for ourselves, and all under one banner things that are going on down in Wales now. As Angus says, it has ramped things up and has got people engaged in moving on things. That's what we should be doing just now.
That's right. Anyway, so we'll move on. We've got another question in, which is from Raj1. And the question is, it's particularly for Craig. And the question is, do you think the passing of the Spy Cops Bill has implications for the independence struggle? Either of them want to come in on that after, that's fine. So, I mean, it's not particularly to do with Section 30, but there's definitely a connection.
Well, I think, plainly, when you have security service exempt from the law for crimes they commit, that's got to be a great concern to everyone. And anybody who doesn't understand that security services are targeted on us is very naive indeed. Protection of the United Kingdom is the task of the security services, and the biggest single threat to the United Kingdom is us. If we're not the biggest single threat to the United Kingdom, we're not doing our job very well. So there's no doubt that we are, perceived as an internal enemy, as the enemy within. And it's strange because whenever you talk about it, people, accuse you of being paranoid or conspiracy theorist, whatever, as though the billions of pounds that the UK government spends on GCHQ and on MI5 and the tens of thousands of people employed there were fictitious. These things exist. The Integrity Initiative exists. The 77th Brigade exists, but they're all genuine. So, and the trying to influence the social media narrative with hundreds of fake online identities is that's the most beneficent, that's the least nasty aspect of security service involvement in countering the Scottish independence movement. There will undoubtedly be an awful lot of surveillance going on of Scottish independence activists, and there will be people around. And it's best not to think about it, because if you go if you get too deeply into it and try to identify people, it leads to all kinds of nonsense. But people will exist within the movement who are, in fact, placed there. And again, you say that, and people call you a conspiracy theorist. But look, there's a trial just finished in London about over 40 undercover policemen who were placed into the environmental movement, who were there to spy for decades and decades closely on people whose campaign was to stop a bypass or protect a forest, and people and policemen who married activists in order to maintain their sleeper roles. Anybody who, it really does happen. It really does happen, and you can Google and see what's been in the High Court in London in the last few weeks about that. Anybody who believes there aren't such people infiltrated into the independence movement is very, very naive, and it's something we have to be on guard against. But trying to witch hunt is a big mistake. I absolutely don't recommend people to go down that route.
Okay, thank you. Would either of the other two like to come in on that?
Oops. No. Hello?
Hello?
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. I thought I pressed a button there and everything kind of struggled about. Yeah, I think the problem with the Scots is we don't have a sense of our own importance and their strategic importance within Europe. We've got some of the biggest oil and gas resources. We control the back door to the Atlantic through the Scapa flow, and in terms of UK importance, we've got all the fresh water. Also, I mean, the oil and gas receipts and the estimated collateral value of oil and gas is what enables the UK to borrow money and keep its AA rating up. So there's every reason for the security services to be targeting the independence movement and so on. As Craig says, it's best not to think about it too much. I remember when I was doing PA for Phil Boswell, and we all got a big form to fill out, and it was full of all kinds of questions. Effectively, are you a terrorist? Are you working to undermine the UK government? And we're like, well, what do we put down for this one? Of course we are, sort of thing. But yeah, it's best not to think about it too much, but we have to be aware of some of the things that are just being quietly signed away, and some of the extensive powers that the Coronavirus Act has bestowed upon the government, and which were passed through with the minimum of review just a couple of months ago as well, which have powers of arrest and detention, dispersal of assemblies and so on, and that looks to be continuing for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you. So we've got another question that's come in, and it's basically a statement, I suppose, that would like confirmation of opinion on. Basically, it's from Jeff Bush, and it said, so is this a valid route? 1, declare majority in the Holyrood elections in 2021 as a mandate to declare independence. 2, gain a majority and declare independence. 3, hold a confirmatory referendum in 3 years. So who would like to take that question for that? Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah. Yeah, if we can hear the 3 steps again.
Right, okay, the 3 steps are: 1, declare majority in Holyrood as a mandate to declare independence. I presume that's a majority of independent supporting parties. And 2, gain a majority and declare independence. Or 3, hold a confirmatory referendum in 3 years. So I'm not sure whether that's steps or whether there's three choices. I can't quite decide there. It's a bit difficult.
I mean, I think if I can go, if Julie and Craig are okay with that, I'm okay with that. I think if we have a majority at Holyrood, then whoever is going to do that would have to have stood at the election and told the people that if you vote for me and my type in majority, we will be moving Scotland to independence. You could then have a confirmatory referendum afterwards if you wanted to, perhaps. Quite often, if the majority is so big, you might not bother the referendum, because no side wants to waste their time. The thing is obvious. Well, one thing that does happen is when the unionists by default stand, they're actually standing to maintain the union, and if they come in majority, there won't be any such vote. So by default, they're holding on to the union by voting for them. So I think we should, when we're using an election, we should be using it from our point of view, because actually, when you think about it, they're using the election by doing nothing for the position they hold.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
One of the problems, just to pick up on a point there from Angus, one of the problems that the independence movement is facing is how it reaches out to people who support independence but belong to Labour, for example. When I was a councillor, the Labour group actually couldn't put the referendum on the agenda, which was going at that point, because so many of the Labour councillors in North Lanarkshire actually supported yes. But trying to get those people to vote in such a way that would translate into a general election is tricky. And so far that hasn't happened. Maybe declaring a plebiscite might encourage them to do that.
Yeah, this is the advantage of talk and interaction, is when you know that that's an issue or a problem. You can say this election is about independence. You achieve it, and we will have we'll have different elections to an independent Scottish Parliament come a year's time or something. But if you want to move yourselves away from the Boris Johnson and the Tory government for this election, you're going to have to decide to vote very strategically, not tactically, strategically for a change in Scotland. Otherwise, we just carry on with more of the same, and we can moan forever and campaign against the Tories, bedroom tax, and try and mitigate this and mitigate that thing. The sort of things that Norway doesn't have to mitigate, the sort of things that Ireland doesn't have to mitigate, because they're in charge and they just do it as they want from the get-go.
Yeah. Can I say that?
Yes.
It's that's true. Consistently, if you look at the breakdowns on opinion polls, 30 to 40% of Labour voters in Scotland support independence, and that's something well worth remembering. Of course, that's 30 to 40% of a shrinking number, because the Labour vote in Scotland goes down a lot, but that's still 3 to 4%. Of the voting population who are independent supporters who vote Labour, and that's important to remember. Strangely enough, all opinion polls always show, again, if you look at the breakdowns, something like 5 to 6% of SNP voters don't support independence, which is again peculiar, and is one of the difficulties with a plebiscitary election. But the way you get around that is by making very, very plain what the election is about and what it means. The only thing I didn't understand about Jeff Bush's suggestion was that he seemed to suggest that the confirmatory referendum would be 3 years after the Parliament declared independence. That makes no sense at all to me. 3 months after the Parliament declares independence, you're not. I'm thinking of a confirmatory referendum, which is part of the process of declaring independence, part of the independence process, not a years later, were you happy with that decision? Once you've declared independence, you've declared independence. And no country that's declared independence from the UK has ever wanted to go back. And I think that's so remote a possibility, it doesn't have to be guarded against.
I mean, if I can come in on Craig's earlier point there about the number of Labour supporters who support independence, and we know in the polls that the support for independence is higher than support for the SNP. So to make the election about independence and the plebiscite for independence would seem to have electoral advantages for the SNP, because I would imagine for those Labour supporters, by now they've figured out the only way they're going to change Scotland is to really control the powers here and not to have mainly governments over Scotland that Scotland doesn't vote for. So the more we examine and the more we argue the point, I think the case is made more and more. We know the door is locked to the plan A. Boris will say no, he'll use his veto. So therefore, we use the plan B. The support for independence is higher than the SNP. So therefore, there's a lot to be gained from that route.
Thank you. So, did you want to come in, Julie? No? Okay. So, a question here that says, it's from Douglas Porter, and it says, panelists, do you think that the EU will become more vocal or demonstrate support for Scotland's independence after Hogmanay, basically? Do you think that it did, that if it did that, it would change the mind of no voters? So, who wants to go for that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty we see with the EU is a members club of 27 sovereign countries. And I don't like to dwell on Quebec and Catalonia and other places, but you can see why Scotland was maybe at their mercy in the past. David Cameron would rock up to the club and say, hey lads, can you say something? I think he even tried to get Putin to say something against Scottish independence. But after the point the UK are no longer in the club, you'll probably see, I don't know if you'll see governments getting bolder, but you'll certainly see individuals within parliaments getting quite a lot bolder. I think we're seeing that amongst the Irish already. You'll see that in other countries. And, there are a number of people I don't know, maybe not name the country at the moment, in case there are people looking in who've not got the best of intentions. But, I was told in one European country that the majority of our parliamentarians support your independence, quite unambiguously. So you will find there's great sympathy for Scotland. Let's go back to John Steinbeck's conversation with Jackie Kennedy, where they said Scotland was a lost cause, and the other said Scotland was an unwon cause. So in many places, and I think the way we've done this in Scotland, and are arguing, the point was made earlier by Craig in a side remark, which said there'd be nothing about violence or anything like that. We've used the power of people's mind and the power of reason to try and achieve our independence, which I think has got a lot of international respect and a lot of understanding for what we're trying to do as well. So to go back to answering the questions, I think we're going to see greater boldness from individual MPs, maybe individual members of government in various parliaments across Europe. Certainly greater breaking of cover now that the UK is no longer in their club, and there's no consequences from the top when their man comes back from the summit after the UK PM being a little bit annoyed. The UK PM wouldn't be there. So thanks, Brexiteers. It's the one thing you've maybe given us.
Thank you. Do you, Craig or Julie, do you want to come in?
No, absolutely agree.
Okay. No. Excellent, thanks. So I've got another question here from Kevin, and it is, can we not have a vote on whether Scotland wants a referendum to prove the Scots want it or not? I think we kind of covered that earlier, but maybe explore it a little bit further. So does anybody want to come in that?
What's this, having a vote to see if we want to have a vote?
Yes, well, have a vote on whether we want a referendum. Yeah. Vote on whether we want a vote, basically, yeah.
Well, I think we'd just sicken the people, pull them out. We'd either vote on the issue. If you take them to the polling station, you vote on the issue, or we don't take them out. But to say, right, come to the polling stations, and then we might take you back to the polling stations. So, I'm not a great fan of that one, but others might be.
Well, what do you think, Julie?
Yeah, I agree with Angus. I mean, this is also the advantage of using an election that's already set up. Is that you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of checking the intelligibility of the question, the 10-week sign up for campaigners and all that kind of thing. It really is a faff doing that kind of thing. I would use the May 2021, and then after that confirmatory election. I mean, this is something else we do actually need to think about. Actually, is the timescale from May to when would be the earliest that we could hold that question in terms of the organising of it? Because again, that's not a straightforward thing, and it could be a few months, and a lot can happen in that time. But we need to be ready for that.
You remember, of course, there might be a problem with a confirmatory referendum in that you're not yet independent, and you may not manage to get to hold a confirmatory referendum, but you're actually independent, because Boris's one power would be to block a confirmatory referendum. So a confirmatory referendum is maybe a dangerous policy when the people have already said yes. Mm-hmm. And then when we are independent, well, the confirmatory referendum would be like, maybe the Irish now decided to have a referendum on independence. Well, I think probably 99%. If the dead themselves didn't rise to come and vote, we might have 105% of the Irish population voting for independence.
Vote early, vote often.
Dave, do you want to come in that?
Yeah, no, I think no, that's right. You definitely, the process needs to be fast. One thing I can't understand at all, which I think is frankly is complete and utter bollocks, and it's one reason why, if you did declare independence, then have a confirmatory referendum, you wouldn't be doing it. You'd be doing it as an independent country already. You wouldn't be doing it under the auspices of Westminster or the UK Electoral Commission. And I think the idea that we can go to a Westminster election, you can go from a dissolution of Parliament to the election of the new government, polling day, in I think about 3 weeks, 2 days or something is the minimum period you can do it in. And it often is that kind of length. But we need this 8 or 9 month process for a one question referendum is complete and utter nonsense. There's no reason whatsoever why a perfectly valid referendum can't be organised, got up and put through in a 3-4 week period. And that's the kind of period we should be looking for. It just seems to me yet more stupidity and procrastination, and an awful lot than the idea that it takes months and months and months and months for focus panels and God knows what to test the question that you've already had a referendum on. Again, just utter nonsense. I have no idea at all why the Scottish government entertained this bollocks.
Okay, thanks. Is everybody happy, or do you want to come in again? No. Okay.
That was frankly put.
I moved on there. Did you see that? We're allowed to say these things, I think. Otherwise, they'll beep us out anyway. So, another question here.
I didn't say I disagreed. I just said it was frankly put.
So, another question here from Mike Fennick, and the question is: when the proof that we have the right of self-determination and can declare independence exists, why are we waiting? Okay.
Yeah, that's again a good question, and it's another variation of the earlier question. I think what we're waiting for isn't for permission, and it was put earlier, and we do have the right. Yeah, but we need to make sure that we have established the legitimacy that that's the people's point of view. I mean, as an SNP MP, I would just love to declare independence tomorrow. But unless people are coming with me, I'd be a bit solitary here in Barra, maybe declaring that. So we've got to find a way of harnessing it, and that is us back to a ballot box situation. Boris is blocking the referendum ballot boxes. The court might block Martin Keating's ballot box. Therefore, the only ballot box we've got left is the ballot box on May the 6th, 2021. And if we don't choose that one, I haven't looked up the date in May 2026. That might be the time that we're using it. So, but it's good to tease these things out, though. I quite like that we start thinking, and because I've heard that point several times.
Okay, thanks. Craig, do you want to come in on that?
No, I think I agree with what Angus just said.
Julie?
No, yeah, just go along with that.
Okay, excellent. Just move on to questions. Okay, this is quite a slightly different topic. We're moving into discussion about the UN at this point. As people will be aware, Scotland doesn't actually have a representative per se of its own at the UN. So this is a question from the Fast and the Dead, and it is there a Scotland representative primed for the UN? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Hey, have you your bag packed? Julie, have you your bag packed?
Have you guys got your bags packed? Let's go together.
It's quite interesting. One thing I think which we aren't doing enough of, we're not taking seriously enough the fact that it is international recognition that makes you an independent country. And although there are officers established, trade officers and that kind of thing established by the Scottish government here and there, we've not done nearly enough international lobbying. And I should say there's a Scottish trade officer at one far-flung foreign country. I'm not going to name them because that's unfair because they're a civil servant. But they're there representing Scottish, paid by the Scottish office to be in a British embassy in this country. And they're actually a die-hard unionist. So, where we have got offices open, we're sending the wrong bloody people to staff them, which is extraordinarily annoying. But we should be doing much more already to be out there and lobbying. And also we should be contacting certainly European Union countries and saying to them, look, Scotland's independence is going to be the biggest question in the United Kingdom for the next few years. You need to be opening now your consulate in Edinburgh, getting ready to open. Every EU country should have a consulate in Edinburgh now. And we need to be contacting them and telling them that. And we need to use people. I was talking to an old friend of mine, a chap called Donny Blair, who used to be a senior executive with Diageo. He was based in Poland and ran all of Diageo's operations into Eastern Europe. And Donny from there knows, I should say, I was also posted in Warsaw at one stage in my career, and I knew Donny there. And Donny knows Donald Tusk extremely well. Donny could walk into Donald Tusk's home and be welcome without having to phone up to say he was coming, or whatever. And Donny contacted Donny, who's been an SNP member his entire life, contacted the SNP and spoke with various people, including with Alan Smith, at the time that Brexit was going on, saying, would it be helpful to the SNP, while Donald Tusk, was president of the European Commission, saying, would it be helpful that I went to see him? He's my old friend. Shall I go and see him and talk to him about Scottish independence? And because the party is so absolutely anal about control, he was actively discouraged and told not to do so. And I'm not thrusting myself forward here, but I also know Donald, and I know several heads of state. There are lots of people I know from my past career that I could be out there lobbying, but there's nothing coming from the SNP to use the amazing talent we have in this country, and there are lots of people like me who are Scots who've made their careers abroad, who know all these senior people. We should have them out there lobbying and preparing the international ground. There's nothing of that kind of initiative going on at all. So sorry, I rambled on a bit there. It's a particular point I'm passionate about.
It was a very interesting ramble, though. The one thing I would add to Craig's good points there was Neil Richmond, who is a rising star in Fine Gael, advised the Scots recently to start setting up offices in all the European capitals of the Scottish Government, which seems an eminently sensible idea, but it also maybe shows where Neil's sympathies lie. And he's close to Leo Varadkar, who's sort of Taoiseach on and off. So it just shows a lot of feeling, I think, around in Europe that there's goodwill to Scotland. No, not just in Poland and other places, but it's everywhere. It's very good to hear of Donald Tusk, incidentally.
Why do you think his name's Donald? It's not a Polish name.
Steady on. I mean, there's Donald John from Lewis, who's over in. We'll say no more.
Can I just add just a wee point to that, as a matter of interest, that there are obviously independent supporters in Europe. We have the German Scots for Independence, and also we have the Netherlands for Independence, both of which have had marches and rallies, which I've attended. And the response we got in both Berlin and in The Hague was absolutely incredible, from people just out and about. And we were staying over. There was a lot of us have been over, and people, say in the guest houses or the places, pubs we went into or whatever, were absolutely fascinated about us being there. Particularly, I think, after Brexit, and I think that we would have a lot of support. And I do think I think that idea about making more statement in Europe would probably be good. Julie, do you want to come in this question?
Yeah, I think again this is the kind of confidence thing. I think bigger parties can sometimes get a wee bit set in their ways and become a bit risk averse. And we need to. I mean, Scotland needs to start making friends out there. Again, this is about preparing the ground. And I mean, the SNP did miss an opportunity with Craig some years ago here, where Craig could actually have been a MSP in the AIRSON. I don't know if you would want it now, Craig, but that was very much a missed opportunity for the SNP. Doesn't mean that we couldn't still send you out to do that. But yeah, I mean, we should be reaching out to people. There's a certain amount of, you've got to put trust in folk and the skills that they have. And funnily enough, I mean, this is quite familiar territory for us at the moment, because we're a new party. We're having to reach out to a lot of people and trust and find out what people's skills are. And sometimes it works out right, and sometimes it works out wrong. But it's actually been quite an invigorating process, and it reminds me a wee bit of the early days of the referendum, where we were all kind of pitching in and trying to get things moving. And we need to get some of that spirit back again, and a sort of can-do attitude to things, rather than are we allowed to. Do it first and ask permission later.
Excellent, thanks. Well, just to say, we're coming to kind of like nearly the end of the show. We've got time for maybe one or two questions, and then obviously I'd like you to think of your closing remarks. But I'll ask the next question, and then hopefully if we've got time, we'll squeeze another one in. But thanks again to everybody who's been sending in their questions. That's been really great. So this question is from John Park, and it is: do the panellists think tactical voting at the next May's election to take unionists held seats will advance the cause for independence? And who would like to answer that? Julie, you want to go for that one?
I could just answer that question yes, and leave it at that. Yeah, I think it's essential. As I said at the start when I was sort of doing sort of introductory piece, Machiavelli's thing that if you wish to rule a people, you go and sit amongst them. We've got to get them out of Holyrood. We've got to get them out. We've got to break up that network. If we're going to have any success with independence, this is what we need to do. These are the kind of things we need to be doing and thinking about. We've got to play smarter and bolder, and we've got to get on the front foot instead of reacting all the time. So definitely yes. The unionists have been doing it for years. So why shouldn't we?
Excellent, thanks. Anybody else want to come in on that?
I think Angus can't tell people to vote for anyone apart from the SNP. I don't think we should ask him to do so. But I took the view that the SNP is the necessary vehicle to get us to independence. We don't have another mass political party that has independence as its aim. I kind of feared that the vehicle was A, stalled, and B, pointing in the wrong direction. But the answer to that was to turn it round and get it pointing in the right direction and get it going again, rather than build a new vehicle from scratch. And I do think that the results of the NEC elections at the last SNP conference show that there were an awful lot of people thinking much the same as me. And I know an awful lot of people who are strong independent supporters who want early independence have left the SNP after the last few years because of lack of progress towards independence. And I don't think SNP is a lost cause. I've stayed in it and fighting to get it in the wrong direction. They're excellent people in it, like Angus. And I think I would urge people to pile back in. That isn't to say that there's not a place for tactical voting, because despite others who will argue differently, like James Kelly, for whom I have enormous respect, if the SNP is still polling anything like the numbers it is polling at the moment, then list votes for the SNP are going to be wasted almost everywhere, except conceivably the south of Scotland. And at the last Holyrood election, list votes for the SNP were wasted almost everywhere, except the south of Scotland. It just mathematically, the chances are, if you give your second vote to the SNP, you're not going to elect anyone, and you're going to let a Tory in as a result. And that's just mathematically true. It's inarguable that it's true. What you can say is if the SNP fall back in the opinion polls, and if they're back down to the 40% mark, then you can argue. But I don't think there's much chance the SNP are going to fall back in the opinion polls come May. And it's something to look at closer to the election when we know for sure. But at the moment, the argument for giving your second vote to another independent supporting party is extremely strong. And that's why the ISP exists, as far as I'm aware. Apart from, I think, also sharing our impatience at the speed with which the SNP is moving towards independence. But those are my thoughts. If the election were tomorrow and the opinion polls were the same as they are now, then I would find it very hard to argue you should give your second vote to the SNP, because it would be wasted.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody else want to come in on that question?
I think we're fine. SNP 1-2.
Okay. Well, do you know, I'm just looking at the time now, and I believe, Craig, you had to leave quite soon anyway. So I think
I'm being told my dinner's getting cold.
Mine is as well. I can probably hear it. So
I've been quietly munching under the screen.
I was thinking, I was wishing I had done the same. Anyway, so yeah, well, listen, do you know, I think what we want to do is just maybe ask you to, if you want to put in some closing remarks each, just that would be really nice, just to try and sum up a wee bit of what we were talking about tonight, and about Section 30, because, but I know that the conversation has advanced on from that quite a bit, but it's, it's not gone too far off the topic. And I think tonight has given us an awful lot of new ideas and new things to think about. I certainly have quite a few new ideas about it. And so I might want to if you want to just put some closing remarks in. Would you like to go first, Julie?
You're muted, Julie.
Is she? She muted?
Right. Yeah. What I would say is it's really important, first of all, not to box ourselves in, and not to put all our hope in one route. And the second thing is that we need to do lots and lots of preparation. All the things that we've talked about tonight, like making friends with other countries, going on social media, having things ready. So that when the moment comes, we can actually react. I think that's the important thing, because as I said at the start, Westminster are ready, so we have to be ready as well.
Excellent, thanks. Angus, have you got a closing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd just reiterate the main point. So, if ever in communication, say it once, tell them what you're going to say it, and then say it again. So the point is to understand is that Plan A is a plan to ask Boris Johnson to ask the people a question and then get their answer. And that is obviously going to be blocked by the UK government because they know what the answer will be. The answer will be for independence. Plan B is one to ask the people directly. That is hard for them to block because it puts them in the territory of Lukashenko. They don't want to stand against the people when the people speak. I'm pretty sure a number of Tory and Labour MPs I know at Westminster from outside Scotland would be distinctly uncomfortable, shall we say, of a position of not accepting the democratic will of our people. And, eventually we've seen with Westminster, they have accepted the independence of nation upon nation upon nation. And the final point, about 100 years ago, there were only 50 independent states on earth. There's now about 200. Europe alone has as many independent states as the world had 100 years ago. So independence is the way of the future. It shows that countries are improving the lot of their peoples when they have the decision-making powers closer to those peoples. So that's why I'm impatient to get Plan B going and to get independence going and have Plan B at the 2021 election rather than wait. Everybody realises, and we'll have it at the 2026 election. As Seamus Mallon said about Sunningdale and the Good Friday Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement was Sunningdale for slow learners. We don't want the 2026 election to be the 2021 election for slow learners. So we have to sharpen up Scotland, and there's a big internal push we've got in the SNP as well to make sure that if Boris Johnson says no to Plan A, there are consequences. Currently, there's no consequences. We saw in January he just said no, and he went and thought about something else. He probably hasn't thought about independence too much since then. He didn't have to think about it. Well, let's make sure the world is thinking about it, not just Boris Johnson.
Okay, thank you. And Craig, would you like to put over some closing remarks? I think you're muted.
You're muted again, Craig.
I keep doing
and
it.
Definitely the best closing remarks ever that couldn't be repeated.
We don't need a Section 30. We don't need anything from UK domestic law. Independence is a matter of international law, not of domestic law. We don't need to keep asking Boris Johnson. If we ask him, he'll say no anyway. And people who argue, the most amusing argument I've heard for years is the argument that the more certainly we will win the referendum, the more he will have to grant a Section 30. The better we're doing in the polls, the less likely he is to grant a Section 30. There's no way they're going to grant a Section 30 when we're going to actually win the referendum because our resources are worth far too much to them. So, no, we should forget the Section 30 route. We should go for independence, and we're going to have a very bumpy year ahead where I hope a great deal is going to happen. And I want people to be prepared to accept, and people to look forward to a situation where we're moving towards independence in a way that is acceptable in international law, but may be viewed as illegal by Westminster. And all that entails, we may be looking for actions like civil disobedience. We may be looking for strikes. We may be looking for goodness knows what, because we've got to take our independence. Our independence is not going to be given to us, and we're not going to ask anyone else for it. We're going to take it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, that's been a really interesting evening, and I hope that everyone who's watching has enjoyed it. And it just really... I'd just like to say thank you to all of our panellists tonight for taking the time out of their busy schedules to come and to join this tonight and to add to the debate. And also to thank, of course, Independence Live, who have made this possible to bring out to everybody, and to everyone at home who's watching, and also to, yes, East Kilbride, who put this on for us. So I've just been an invited guest to help them. I'm technically from East Ayrshire, just a wee bit down the road. So thank you very much.
Thanks, East Kilbride.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay, well, thank you very much. So, and hopefully, some of these ideas will be coming into fruition really soon. And yep, okay. Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Aye, thanks.
Bye.
Never miss a live stream. The What's On guide to live stream events and shows now has its own website. You can find the guide at whatsonguide.scot, independencelive.net, or on multiple Facebook pages. Do you create your own live stream events and shows? Get them registered on the guide. See whatsonguide.scot for full details.
This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
We know you're busy people, so most of our shows are also on demand on our Scottish Independence podcast channel, available wherever you get your podcasts. You'll see what a great variety of shows we have. There's something for everyone. Our newest on-demand platform is IndyLive Radio's YouTube channel. We have set up playlists for our most popular shows and current topics, currency, list parties. New content is added almost daily, so subscribe and you won't miss anything. Join us. Thanks for listening.
Film, you can watch this again, you can be part of it. It's Independence Live. Yeah. A few people asked about YouTube. It'll be YouTube/Independence Live. That's where you'll find the footage.
It's not acceptable to say we just keep on trying and we have another mandate and we have another mandate, we keep on trying. You've got to make a political judgment that it's not going to work and say, well, in that case, we have either got to admit that we're not going to go for independence. And this is where I think the government has not been honest with people. That is, I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying that it is at least a possibility. If we hone in totally on Section 30, we could not get a referendum at all under Section 30. And therefore, that to me means that you've got to find another way.
But I don't think anybody who's gone over to yes now is really for moving. because I think they can see clear as day what things look like. And I always felt that during the independence referendum that it would take a no vote in order for a lot of Scots to realise the consequences of voting no. They would have to see what happens when they vote no in order to realise what a mistake it was.
And to me, that's the clear blue water between staying in the UK and going for independence. It's clear, regardless of what Boris Johnson said the other day, that they will want to go back to business as usual, where the ultra-rich are the ones who gain from everything. We don't want to be part of that. We want the chance to actually build a fairer country.
It's the Brexit stuff for me, the nepotism stuff for me, breaking international law stuff for me, the ERG hijacking UK democracy stuff for me, education is a luxury stuff for me, £9,000 tuition a year stuff for me, it's the NHS on the table for a US trade deal stuff for me, demonising the working classes stuff for me, refusing starving children free school meals stuff for me, it's Boris calling Muslim women letterboxes stuff for me, his pickaninnies comment stuff for me, his bum boys comment stuff for me, his Scotland is a verminous race comment stuff for me, the UK internal market bill ripping up the devolution settlement stuff for me, devolved legislators being ignored during Brexit stuff for me, a lack of UK leadership during COVID stuff for me, nuclear weapons being in Scotland stuff for me, a decade of Tory governments Scotland didn't elect stuff for me, it's a weak left opposition in England stuff for me, attempting to frame independence as anti-English bigotry stuff for me, it's trying to ban anti-capitalist references in schools stuff for me, it's England-centric lefties painting SNP as a protest vote even though Scottish Labour is spineless stuff for me, it's the UK for me.
Hi there, I'm Cliff.
And I'm Russ.
And we're from the Veterans for Scottish Independence 2.0 group. And we're just invading your privacy today to let you know that we will be very shortly pushing a programme out on live stream to do with the veterans, their needs as it will be during an independent campaign. The next independence campaign, and indeed in an independent Scotland.
So get yourself in gear, come and join us, pull up a sandbag.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Never miss a live stream. The What's On guide to live stream events and shows now has its own website. You can find the guide at whatsonguide.scot, independencelive.net, or on multiple Facebook pages. Do you create your own live stream events and shows? Get them registered on the guide. See whatsonguide.scot for full details.